Hey everyone, this is your host Raven Syed, and welcome back to Forgotten Echoes, a podcast where we dive into the mysterious and unexplained cases of Black women that often get lost in time. So before we begin today, I want to take a moment to express my deepest gratitude to you. Yes, you. Thank you for tuning in every week, sharing your thoughts on the cases, liking and sharing the episodes. Seriously, I appreciate all of you so much. And if you've been tuning in and you do in fact like the podcast, and I'm assuming you do because you're listening to me right now, please go ahead and leave me a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening from. Like right now, hit the 5-star review button. It is so appreciated and it means a ton to me. Now let's get on with today's episode. Documented cases of twin disappearances in the United States are extremely rare. While exclusive stats on twin disappearances are not specifically available, the rarity of these cases can be contextualized by examining twin birth rates. In recent years, the twin birth rate in the U.S. has been approximately 32.6 per 1,000 total births, equating to about 124,000 twins being born annually. Which may sound like a lot, but the U.S. averages around 3.5 million children being born a year. I'm saying all this to bring home the point that twin disappearances in the U.S. are extremely rare. And to get even more complex, when a child goes missing, time is critical and media coverage can play a vital role in bringing attention to the case. However, not all missing persons receive the same level of urgency or exposure. And if you've been listening to my podcast, you know all too well this is completely true. Many families are left to fight for recognition, struggling against a system that often overlooks certain cases, especially those involving minorities or people living in lower income communities. Well, today's case had all of the above. One of the only twin disappearances that still remains a mystery in the United States. A case that has haunted Augusta, Georgia for over 3 decades. The disappearance of 15-year-old twins, Dannette and Jeannette Millbrook. Their story is not just one of loss, but one of frustration, incompetence, neglect, and despite all of the challenges the family faced, resilience. From the moment they vanished, their case was handled with shocking indifference. Instead of the urgent response that so many missing children cases receive, the Millbrook twins' disappearance was immediately dismissed, and at one point, even removed from the system entirely. Critical time was lost, vital leads faded, and an already struggling family was left to fight for answers on their own. Over the years, the family has spent years pleading for recognition and resources that so many other cases receive without question. And time again, they have been met with phone calls not returned and roadblocks from the very institutions meant to protect them. So how did this happen? How did 2 teenage girls disappear without a trace, only to be forgotten about by the very system that should have fought to bring them home? The fight to bring Dannette and Jeannette Millbrook home is far from over, and today we're making sure their names are not forgotten. This is episode 9, The Disappearance of Dannette and Jeannette Millbrook. Sources for today's episode include the Charley Project, Fox 26, AugustaBusinessDaily.com, CityData.com, NBC News, Oxygen.com, The Disappearance of the Millbrook Twins, Season 1, Episode 1, and the Fall Line Podcast, who did an excellent job recapping this case. Now let's get into it. It was Sunday, March 18th of 1990, and all was well in the charming city of Augusta, Georgia. It was a perfect spring day. You know, the type of day where it's 70 degrees with a light breeze. The sun was out, and to top it all off, Escapade by Janet Jackson just went #1 on the US charts. Augusta, Georgia is a city steeped in history, best known for being the hometown of the one and only godfather of soul, James Brown, the Savannah River, and they host the Masters golf tournament. The city and country all wrapped in one. Yet, despite just weeks before the 1990 tournament, a tragedy unfolded that received no national media coverage and very little local attention. And a lot of that has to do with the harsh socioeconomic differences of Augusta's upper middle class and lower income communities. Now let me break it down to you. Broad Street in Augusta, Georgia, historically showcases a stark contrast in economic conditions between its different sections, reflecting broader patterns of urban development, socioeconomic disparities, and systemic practices such as redlining. In the early to mid-20th century, Augusta, like many American cities, was subject to redlining, a discriminatory practice where neighborhoods were categorized based off perceived investment risks, often correlating with racial composition. As of recent data, Augusta's poverty rate stands at 24.2%, notably higher than Georgia's state average of 13.6%. This disparity underscores the enduring impact of historical economic policies and segregation. Today, Broad Street exhibits a mix of revitalized commercial zones and areas still grappling with economic challenges. Certain segments of Broad Street have undergone redevelopment and gentrification, attracting businesses, new cultural venues, and tourism, while other parts of Broad Street host low-income housing facilities, indicating ongoing financial hardships in these neighborhoods. And the foundation has weaved itself in the very fabric of the community today and has affected how certain locals are perceived, depending on where you live in the city. And I believe the Millbrook family fell victim to this first-handedly. Fraternal twins Dannette Latonia Millbrook and Jeannette Latrice Millbrook were born on April 7th of 1974 to parents Mary Louise Strugis and John Millbrook. The twins had 6 siblings, 5 of which lived with them in their Augusta apartment. While Dannette and Jeannette were twins, they were different in several ways. Their younger sister, Shantae, remembers Dannette as being more outgoing, feisty, and was the twin that would openly speak her mind. She would tend to stand up for her twin when needed. While Jeannette, on the other hand, was more reserved and quiet, and fun fact, she was a huge animal lover. Both girls were described as good girls who really didn't get into any trouble, let alone go out much. Their family described them as homebodies who really only went out when the whole family went out. They had no criminal record and didn't give their mother really any trouble. The twins were in 9th grade at Lucy Laney High School, just starting their lives as freshmen. The twins lived on Cooney Circle with their mother Mary Louise and their siblings. Their father John Millbrook had been abusive, leading Louise to leave him when the twins were just 2 years old. So he wasn't living in the home at the time of the twins' disappearance. However, although he didn't live with the family, he was still in the twins' lives, and as a matter of fact, he lived pretty close to them and they would visit regularly. All in all, despite the hardships their family faced, Dannette and Jeannette were described as loving, funny, and extremely close to their siblings. Their disappearance left a hole in the hearts of those who knew them best. So it's March 18th, and that Sunday began like any other. The family attended church, and after receiving a little bit of money from the pastor to grab the family food, they settled on church's chicken, and the twins were tasked with walking to grab lunch for everybody. So they walked a couple of miles to churches, and once they get back, the family had lunch together. Now, while enjoying the lunch, the twins mentioned a couple details that would haunt the family forever. The twins mentioned that they were walking to churches. A strange white van might have been following them. They just felt like the van was trailing them. However, the twins kind of downplayed it to the family. so their mother wasn't too concerned about the comment. Fast forward, and the family would regret not asking more questions about the van in the moment. The twins also mentioned that they needed money for bus fare for the upcoming school week. The family had recently moved to a new apartment, and this took the twins out of their previous school district. And I could be wrong, but according to reports, it seemed like their new school district utilized the city bus for school transportation. So their mother's like, sounds good, go get the bus fare from your godfather, Ted, who lives around 40 minutes or so walking distance from their home. So as they were told, the twins set out and visit their godfather to ask for the bus fare for school. But before they left, their younger sister, Shantae, asked if she could come along, because if you have a younger sister, you know how it goes. The twins said no, but shouted back, "We're coming back, girl," as they walked out the front door. And that would be the last time Shantae saw her older sisters. And I want to mention that while I was doing research for this case, the source material didn't mention exact times as much as I would have liked. But based on what I've read, I'm going to assume that they arrived at their godfather's home sometime between 1:30 and 2:45 p.m. So the twins finally get to their destination, and as promised, Ted gave them $20 for bus fare, which was a little bit more than they anticipated, and that allowed them to buy some snacks as well. What happened after they left Ted's house is where the mystery begins. Around 3 p.m. or so, the twins left Ted's house, and on the way home, they visited their older sister's home, who didn't live far from Ted. They stopped by for a bit, and before leaving, asked if she would walk them back home. And she politely declined because she just had a baby a few days prior. So enough said. But nonetheless, it was a strange request, and once the twins packed up their things and left, she made a point to call their mother to fill her in on the incident. Now, after leaving their older sister's home, they make another stop at their cousin Juanita's home, asking her the same thing. Could she walk home with them? Unfortunately, Juanita's parents said it was getting dark out and they didn't want her out that late. So at this point, the twins were 0 for 2. And I wonder, why did the twins want someone to walk home with them so badly? I honestly think that's probably the most important question of the case, and I just wish we knew the answer, because they asked 2 different family members and they were persistent. But on the flip side, hearing about their personalities, they may have been scared of something, but maybe a little too reserved to speak up about it, or at least speak up about it directly. That's the part of the case that always gives me the chills. And I also want to point out that if you didn't already realize it, several of their families live pretty close to one another. Like, they're all within the same neighborhood or a mile or so apart. Now fast forward, and it's around 4:30 p.m., and it's starting to get dark. And the twins have left their cousin's home, and from there they walk to their local gas station and convenience store, the Pump and Shop, on MLK Boulevard in 12th Street. This would be the last time the twins were officially seen. The twins briefly spoke with the clerk, Gloria, who was also a family friend, and she stated they purchased chips and soda, which tracks because their godfather did give them extra money, and their sister did say that that was their favorite snack. But she turns her head for a moment, and when she looks back to see where the girls went, they were out of sight. So she didn't see which way they went when leaving the convenience shop, and just like that, they never made it home and essentially vanished into thin air. And imagine, just for a moment, how ordinary this trip seemed at the time. Just a pair of teenagers running errands, stopping at familiar places, catching up with family members. And yet something happened in them between that final store visit and the final walk home. Something that took them away from their family forever. The last known moments of the Millbrook twins' lives were filled with routine, with everyday activities of 2 teenage girls who have done this walk many, many times. And then they just disappear. As the time passes by, it starts getting dark outside, and Louise begins to get worried. The twins knew to always be home by sunset, So she grabbed Shantae, and they hit the pavement tracking the steps the twins would have taken to Ted's home. And they find nothing. As soon as they realize the twins are nowhere to be found, they call the Richmond Police Department and open up a missing persons report. And I wish something fruitful would have come from this investigation. The police jump into action, forming search parties and retrieving evidence and collecting statements. But quite literally, the opposite happens. The investigation into their disappearance was plagued with missteps, negligence, and a staggering lack of urgency from the very beginning. And I mean, they originally declared the twins as runaways, even though they had no history as such and lacked any behavioral history that would support that assumption. Like, the twins were sweet girls, and it just doesn't make sense, and it's highly unlikely that both girls would run away after stopping by so many family members' homes and receiving bus fare for the upcoming week. It just is completely out of character for them and doesn't make sense. But this fell on deaf ears, and not much effort was put into finding the teens. And I want to remind you that this was just a couple weeks before the Masters golf tournament was happening, and there was virtually no media coverage on this case. And when I say no media coverage on this case, I mean none nationally and very little locally. The perfect opportunity to spread the news on a bigger platform, and it wasn't done. Because frankly, investigators didn't believe that the twins were worth advocating for. So years go by, and the investigators are barely working on the case at this point. And at that, they're barely contacting the family. And that's where a series of screw-ups are brought to light. It comes to the family's attention that the original case file vanished. And yes, you heard me right, vanished. Due to flooding and or shredding, because I think the police department was running out of space at the time. They don't exactly know which one. The main takeaway is that there's no case file, and as new investigators try and take a stab at the case, they realize details were incorrect from the very beginning. The twins' names weren't even spelled right in the reports, and small clerical errors made it hard to track the case properly. And this was not just a mistake. It was a failure, in my opinion, and a display of incompetence and borderline insubordinance. The lives of two young Black girls were deemed unworthy of serious attention. Their cases completely brushed aside. And that's not all. The case was prematurely closed in 1993 when an investigator that was working the case falsely claimed the twins had been found and simply just didn't want to return home. A claim made without any supporting evidence. And because of this, their names were removed from the National Missing and Exploited Children's Database, effectively erasing them from the system that was supposed to bring them home. And with that, the case was presumably closed. And I just want to emphasize that this investigator never laid eyes on the twins. He never heard their voice. He heard from somebody else that they may have been spotted and decided to come to the conclusion they just chose not to come home on their own volition. And you want to know the worst part? This investigator reached out himself to the National Missing and Exploited Children's Database and told them to remove the twins' profile because they were found. So he never saw them and never spoke to them, but came to that conclusion on his own. There is no way this decision was made with the best intentions of those girls in mind. You could never convince me otherwise. I can honestly say that this choice alone drastically lowered the chances of the twins ever returning home. And it wasn't until 2013, yes, 23 years after their disappearance, that the case was reopened thanks to the resilience of their sister, Shantae. Determined to find answers, she continuously pushed law enforcement to take another look. And as original investigators were replaced with green police officers, it worked. The new sheriff in town, Richard Roundtree, even acknowledged the serious flaws in the original investigation and vowed to revisit the case. But it had been a couple decades at this point. People moved in and out of the neighborhood, and with so much time passing, any leads from 1990 had dried up. 4 years later, in 2017, DNA samples from the family were submitted, and age progression images were created in hopes of helping the public recognize what Dannette and Jeannette might look like if they in fact were still alive. Despite these efforts, no solid leads surfaced, leaving their loved ones in a constant state of uncertainty. But there are theories. For one, there's one chilling detail that stands out to me. Remember earlier that day, the twins told their mother that a white van had been following them. No further information about this van ever resurfaced. Could the van be involved? Was the van watching them and waiting for the right moment to strike? Did the girls sense danger? And maybe this prompted them to ask their cousin and sister to walk them home? There are so many possibilities we just don't have the answers to. Another theory might be a little bit more than a theory, but it's yet to be proven. In the 2019 documentary, The Disappearance of the Millbrook Sisters, which I watched on Apple TV, and I believe it's on Oxygen as well, and I highly recommend if you want to get a deeper dive into this case. The producers flushed this episode out really well. Now, in the documentary, they have former prosecutor Laura Coates, who I absolutely adore, and retired Detective Paige Reynolds, who essentially take a swing at the case. When I tell you they literally found out more about what happened to the twins while filming this documentary than the actual police force has in over 30 years, I wouldn't be lying. So fast forward to the end of the documentary, and this is the story that's told to them by Ernest Vons, a prisoner at the time who claimed to know what happened to the twins. Now, he says that in 1990, he was 12 years old and involved in the drug world. I guess he was a lower-level dealer or a runner. Now, while in the home of John Millbrook, yes, the twins' father, the twins came by after leaving the convenience shop. And this was normal for not only the twins to come by, but their other siblings as well. Anyways, on that day, there were several drug dealers in the home because John allowed them to sell drugs in his home as he was addicted to crack himself, according to Vons. And on March 18th, he was high. So while the twins were just chilling there, the men were giving the twins alcohol. And some of the men began sexually assaulting one of the girls. Vons mentions he doesn't know which twin, but the other one noticed and spoke up immediately. At that time, everyone at the home was told to leave and couldn't come back until things quieted down. Vons stated he felt like there was a good chance the twins were killed that day, as John was scared the twins would mention the assault to their mother. He also stated he believed their bodies would be found at the Brickyard Pond, a vast dumping ground in the area. But sadly, that lead didn't really lead anywhere. While investigators claimed to be interested in what Vons stated, after taking a look, they found insufficient evidence that the story was credible and decided not to pursue the lead any further. Putting them back at square one, they didn't even search the area he described. And this is unfortunate to me because I see this as being completely plausible just based off of what I heard about the twins' personalities. Dannette standing up for Jeannette and being a little bit more outspoken, I believe that maybe if this is true, the twin that unfortunately was sexually assaulted might have been Jeannette, and Dannette noticed and spoke up for the other twin. In the documentary, Shantae also mentions that it wasn't uncommon for the twins, along with their other siblings, to stop at John's home on a fly. Like, it wasn't a normal for people to just go to his apartment. It was kind of a hangout spot. So with that in mind, I don't think it's odd that the twins would stop at his home from the convenience shop as a last-ditch effort to get somebody to walk with them home. And the last piece of this theory that really stood out to me was Brickyard Pond, because Brickyard Pond is a cesspool of trash and of bodies. Locals know that it's a commonly known dumping ground for all sorts of things. So I don't think it's out the realm that Vons would say that this was the place that the twins' bodies were dumped. And I don't understand why investigators wouldn't even try and investigate it. Now, Sheriff Roundtree did say that they would be open to investigating the area, but because it's so vast, they would need a more narrowed area to search, a specific part of this dumping ground that they could search because it's almost impossible to go through all of it. I just don't know if they ever got that information with Vons, and maybe they did, and it did turn out not to be credible, and that just hasn't been released to the public. Who knows? Now, I'm sure you're wondering, what does John Millbrook have to say about all this? Has anyone spoken to him? And the answer is no, because at the time he was in an adult facility as he suffered from dementia and eventually passed away in 2021. And this is just one of many times investigators dropped the ball, because had they had taken this seriously early on, they would have been able to investigate John. I mentioned early on that John was abusive to the twins' mom, and that was the reason they split, but he also wasn't a good Samaritan in general. Outside of getting in trouble with the law, he was linked to different crimes throughout Augusta in the 90s. He was also linked to several convicted murders and murderers. So did someone affiliated with John have to do with the twins' disappearance? It is plausible, but I guess we may never know. And unfortunately, that's where the story ends. The last update I can find was in 2019. The case is open, but colder than ever. The FBI was finally pulled in on the case, but almost 4 decades later, there isn't much to go on. So I'm going to leave you with this. It's important to recognize the broader systemic failure and how missing Black children were and still are treated. Many cases are wrongfully categorized as runaways, leading to little media attention or law enforcement urgency. This lack of immediate action can be the difference between life and death, or a case solved or cold. The Millbrook twins are not just victims of an abduction or disappearance. They are victims of a society that too often ignores cases like theirs. Now here's the call to action. Dannette and Jeannette Millbrook would be turning 51 years old in a couple weeks. Their family has fought tirelessly for answers, but the case remains unsolved and is currently cold. There is still a $50,000 reward for information leading to answers. And if you have any information, please contact the Richmond County Sheriff's Office at area code 706-821-1080 or visit themillbrooktwins.com to submit a tip anonymously. Shantae continues to advocate for her sisters through the Facebook page Missing Dannette and Jeannette Millbrook. If you want to support this case, consider sharing their story, donating to their billboard fund on GoFundMe, or simply keeping their names alive in conversation. The more awareness we bring to cases like theirs, the harder it becomes for them to be ignored. Sending so much light and love to Dannette and Jeannette's family and friends. Thank you for tuning in to episode 9 of Forgotten Echoes. Please do me a favor and show your support by following the podcast, liking, subscribing, and sharing this episode. And if you feel so inclined to do so, please leave a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening to this episode from. It really helps, and I really, really appreciate it. I'm Raven Syed, and I'll see you next week with another case that needs to be remembered. Stay vigilant, stay aware, and keep the echoes of the forgotten alive. I'll see you soon.